Okay, I think we're live. I hope we're live. This is Ron Deibert. I'm the director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, and we just had a wonderful debate here, the Munk Debates, with Michael Hayden, Alan Dershowitz, Glenn Greenwald, and Alexa Sohanian. And joining me for this discussion is Joseph Menn, who's a reporter with Reuters and the author of Fatal System Error, and Anne Cavoukian, who is still, as of today, I believe, the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, having had a very long, distinguished career in that position. Can you both hear me, first of all?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Joe, I want to turn to you first. You're in LA. You watched us over the stream. Can you give us your general reaction to the debate?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pretty rare occurrence that you get somebody, just looking at Hayden and Greenwald, having them in the same room is pretty great. I think they both gave pretty articulate defenses of their positions. They got the sort of the big emotional stuff without getting way into the details, it was fun to watch. I mean, it's a really serious topic, and you don't normally see the engagement. It's through the filter of a newspaper or an internet piece, and just the sound bites on a talk show don't really do it. So it was really nice to see overall. More specifically, I thought Dershowitz may have actually hurt his own cause when he said that what you do is you measure the intrusiveness against the effectiveness, and that's what you should do. Because I think Greenwald and others have made a pretty good case about how intrusive this stuff is. I think people really feel that. And the effectiveness, well, you got some Republican-appointed judges and some members of Congress saying can't really find a terrorist plot that this stopped. And if they're going to hang it all on terrorism, it hurts if you're saying that's what you should judge us by, and I think it was may have been a mistake for Dershowitz to bring that up.
Well, we'll definitely get back to some of those points. So, Anne, tell us your general reaction.
It was certainly a very spirited debate, and I was enthralled, of course, with Glenn Greenwald. I thought was superb. Obviously, my bias towards privacy tended to lean in his direction. But I want to point out some of the things that I thought were missing. That, not surprisingly, Mr. Hayden's comments, for example, and he would talk about the effectiveness of various activities, and the NSA is only doing limited activities, and we only go in when there's a requirement. There could have been ways to construct what they wanted to do in terms of the bulk metadata. When you listen to people like William Binney, who worked at the NSA for many years, brilliant cryptographer, mathematician, I had the pleasure of working with him recently, and he said that he had told people back then, 2000, etc., that let's encrypt the data. Okay, you want to collect all this data, you want to engage in this massive surveillance because you genuinely think there'll be some benefit. Let's encrypt it. And then in the event that we have reasonable and probable grounds to think that there's something going on, then we decrypt it. We develop a system where everything is not out there in plain text, available and accessible. There's so many ways of doing it. And Dershowitz, he kept talking about, as Joseph saying, the effectiveness. We have to balance the intrusiveness versus the effectiveness. And if some people's privacy is impacted, well, so be it. You weigh that against how effective it is. Are you kidding me? There have been two independent presidential review bodies. President Obama appointed PCLOB, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board under David Medine, and also appointed the Presidential Review Board. Two completely different independent bodies, both came out with reports with virtually the same types of recommendations, saying, one, very little effectiveness, if any, to this massive surveillance. Two, a lot of potential harm in terms of false positives, innocent people being marked. And three, why are we engaging in this at all? There isn't the kind of independent oversight. There is the FISA court, which is certainly better than what we have in Canada, but it's one-sided. So they've made the recommendation at least appoint a public advocate, but more importantly, they're all saying get rid of bulk data collection.
Right. Joe, I mean, and that was great. There's a real difference of opinion around what metadata represents, and you heard Hayden characterizing it as something that's in a lockbox, and the NSA goes up to a transom and says, is it this number or that number? And Greenwald, on the other hand, talking about how actually metadata is very revealing, citing Ed Felton. I tend to agree with them. I think that what we do with all of this data that we leave as a digital exhaust now wherever we go, which is unprecedented in human history. Who has access to it? Where is it stored? I mean, this is the fundamental question of liberal democracy. What did you think of the disagreements there around metadata collection?
Well, I would have liked to, if I was in charge, I would have given each side another 15 minutes on just that point, because I think it's a huge one, and I think there's a problem in that, as massive as the amount of information that's come out about the surveillance programs, we still don't. They've mostly been about capability and collection, and not really about how it's used. They still have those secrets, and maybe they'll come out. Maybe the NSA will be more forthcoming about what they've done with it, because you actually want your intelligence agency to have awesome capability. You just want them to use it judiciously. Maybe some oversight would be nice. And on the bulk stuff, I think it's pretty obvious that metadata tells incredible, intimate detail about people's lives. There was somebody, I believe it was at the EFF, said that they know you called the suicide hotline, you just don't know but they don't know what the conversation was about. I think it's clearly pretty invasive, and it's to say it's not surveillance. It looks more like surveillance than a street light, and I thought the street light camera, and I think that was a good counterpoint.
That was a great counterpoint, I thought, by Greenwald, where he remarked that a surveillance camera is just not what we do online, where our whole lives are exposed, our social networks and so on. One of the things that struck me, being a Canadian, the debate was here in Toronto, was the absence of any real discussion about the contrast with what's happening in the United States, and even how the United States intelligence agencies approach foreigners differently from domestic collection, but also the lack of any discussion about what's going on with signals intelligence here in Canada. And what did you think about that? Because I know we were concerned about that leading into this debate, that will the Canadian dimension to this be brought up, and what about foreigners?
Well, and I hate to have to admit this, but I think we do a far worse job in Canada than the United States. And you might say, how is that possible? The reason it's possible is because CSEC, the Communications Security Establishment of Canada, the equivalent to the NSA here, has so little oversight, virtually, I would say, no independent oversight, and we don't know what they're doing. In the States, what has happened as a result of Mr. Snowden's revelations? You've had a presidential review body, you have the P-Club body, 2 independent bodies reporting. You have all this information and transparency. President Obama has taken to the airwaves. They're talking about it publicly. What have we done in Canada?
Nothing.
Let me think. It's called a shameful silence. No one has taken to the airwaves. Finally, the head of the CSEC went on the TVs, I don't know, a few months ago, and said virtually nothing, said, don't worry. It's basically a trust us model. And the problem is, he was offended. I've written to him several times. He was offended that I was saying he was doing a poor job. He thought I was criticizing him. I wasn't doing that at all. I was criticizing the structure, which lacks any independence. He reports to the Minister of National Defense. This is the commissioner. The Minister of National Defense runs CSEC. So look at how circular it is. There's no independence whatsoever. Parliament doesn't have access to any information. No one is getting any information on this. So in terms of transparency, we have far less than the United States. So I think we should be ashamed of that.
Well, and also a remarkable contrast, I think, is what happens with respect to the private sector here in Canada, where we've seen telecommunications companies, it's been disclosed recently through ATIP requests and questionnaires. First of all, they don't tell us what they're doing at all, no comment. But then we find out through other means that they're actually sharing subscription data, user data, on the order of millions of times a year with government agencies without a warrant. I mean, this is a black hole we live in here in Canada. Joe, I wanted to get back to you and ask you a question because you've been covering this topic for a long time now, and one of the things I hear about from people who are more sympathetic to the NSA side, to people who have maybe access on a regular basis to knowledge of the programs and operations and so on, I hear them say quite often that those slides and the reporting that's done by Washington Post, New York Times, Guardian, and so on, takes it out of context. The documents are not put in their proper context. And you got a piece of that with Hayden when he said, it's like you're coming into the third act and the butler did it. When in fact, if you watch the whole movie reel, you might understand it better. Do you think that the reporting that's gone on around the documents that we've seen as part of the Snowden releases have been contextualized properly?
That's a really good question. I do think they have a point. The intelligence community and defenders have a point. It echoes, what I said earlier, that we know a lot about capability, but now not how it's applied. So we don't have anything that says how often X-Keyscore, the amazing, wonderful search engine that'll get you everybody's goodies about everything, we don't know how often that's used. We don't know how often it's used in the U.S., other countries. We don't know how many people are allowed to use that. And we don't really know a lot about the oversight. It is nice that some of the leaked documents include some FISA court rulings, and you have some back and forth when the NSA occasionally gets in trouble for doing something wrong and they get yelled at by the judges. We don't have all of those documents. That would be nice. I think one of the recommendations of the Presidential Review Board was that they disclose a lot more of the court opinions. So yeah, we don't know everything. We don't, like I said, capability is one thing, how it's used is another. But I think it is hard for most folks to say that we have a terrific system of oversight, really. If the FISA court is granting blanket warrants, bulk warrants, without anybody knowing that, and then nobody's allowed to talk about that, that's not the traditional due process. 10 out of 11 judges, Republican appointed themselves, that's unusual. One side presenting, that's unusual. It's not what most people would think of as due process, I think.
But what would be the alternative? I'm just curious, what would be the alternative? You'd have an adversary for whom? Al-Qaeda? Like an attorney arguing the opposite case? I mean, where does the adversary come in?
A civil liberties advocate, I would think. Okay. Somebody like that.
Yeah. So let's turn to this topic, Anne, and deal with the tough issue. I think everyone recognizes there are real threats to democracy that we have to guard against. What's the proper way to deal with something as fundamental as that? We don't want a bomb blowing up in this building. They all reference the building and that we watched this debate, and we've had some horrific episodes in recent memory. We live in a post-Cold War world with super empowered individuals who can wreak enormous havoc. What's the proper balance to strike? Should we give up some of our privacy for security?
I think I don't like to think of it in terms of giving up some of our privacy. If there is a threat that can be demonstrated, and not conclusively, but you need some evidence. We talk about the courts and due process. If the police have some evidence to give them reasonable probable grounds that something is going on that is suspicious, you go to a court, you get a warrant, you pursue it. What if it's an emergency and you can't do all that? Fine. In exigent circumstances, you enable law enforcement to go after it, and then after the fact, they can go to the court and give notice of what they've done. The point is, there has to be some evidence-based procedures. What we have now is the exact opposite. You have a sort of a counterfactual situation. The evidence isn't supported by what is happening in terms of the blanket collection of everyone's communications. And in so doing, not only is it it's a violation of your privacy and liberty and freedom, but it's also ineffective. So it's a lose-lose. It's a negative sum. It's not even a zero sum. So you need a situation where there is some court of law taking place, warrants are obtained, and absent that, you have provisions for exigent circumstances. We've been operating that way forever. And other people say, well, but look, since 9/11, we haven't had another terrorist attack. So these NSA surveillance systems must be working. That's nonsense. A lot has happened since 9/11. People are more aware of what's going on, and if they see some suspicious activity, they report it themselves. Law enforcement is more nimble. They are looking out for things, boots on the ground. So we're not giving any attention to all of those activities as supporting our freedom and avoidance of another 9/11 situation. The bottom line is the way they're doing it now, the bulk collection, is not only ineffective, it results in a lot of false positives, meaning people get labeled as being potential terrorists when they're not. They're completely innocent. And their lives, what they have to go through to undo that mess and to clear their names, these are innocent, law-abiding citizens, it's a nightmare. So you're not getting any benefit, and you're causing a lot of harm, and you're completely eroding our privacy and freedom.
So, Joe, if I was going to be a devil's advocate to what Anne just said, I think the counter argument would be something along the lines of, one, there's a difference between collection and surveillance. So we may collect all of this data, but when we actually engage in surveillance, when we interrogate the data, that's a different thing. We go to a judge. That was where Hayden talked about the transom that he goes up to, and 22 people have access, and they ask the question, and there's lots of proper oversight. The other question I would have is, well, in order to really find out and preempt suspicious behavior that could lead to some attack, we need to be able to collect it all. In order to establish anomalous behavior, we need to know what the general patterns are. And we have powerful algorithms that allow us to mine through this data to search for that sort of behavior and predict when it's going to happen and hopefully preempt it. Is that what you hear as well? Would you have a counter argument of your own?
Well, let's see. The collection doesn't really count because we're not roaming through it. I'm a little confused about that one. I don't think that's really comforting to most people because there isn't any transparency about the procedures for going back in and rummaging around. You know, some of that has leaked out. It turns out that they don't. You know, it's sort of changing as we speak. For example, it used to be not just the 228 seed numbers. I believe it was actually a lot more, and then they got slapped around a little bit by the FISA court, and they cut it way back. Mm-hmm. In addition, it wasn't just the Yemeni safe house to Buffalo. It was who Buffalo called and who that person talked to. It was 3 hops, and they pared that back. So I'm not sure the NSA is in the best position to argue just, trust us, we'll get all your goodies, and we won't look through it unless we really want to, unless we've got a good reason to. When they were doing that, they were doing more than they were saying, and even the judges found it was too much. I was confused that General Hayden said that they don't do data mining, because I thought that was sort of the whole point, that they look for anomalies, that they look for connections. So I'm not sure really what he meant by that. Maybe they just meant that they haven't gotten really good at it yet.
So one of the things, and I want to go back to you on this too, again, it speaks to being Canadian and watching this debate. There is really a dichotomy between how these issues are discussed within an American context, issues around the Fourth Amendment, around oversight, around metadata collection when it comes to Americans. But I know General Hayden believes that when it comes to foreigners, it's all bets are off. Right, and I think that's the same, it's fair to say, with most signals intelligence agencies of every country around the world. So you have, greater or lesser protections for privacy domestically, and internationally it's kind of this fair game. But at the same time, we live in this global communications network where I'm traveling all over the world. I've got colleagues that I work with. We're all in the same position like that. how do we square that? How will this ever be resolved, do you think?
I'm glad you raised that. First of all, I think it's fiction that they say, well, we only collect information on foreigners. Who cares? The U.S. will collect information on Canadians. Canadians will collect information on Americans, and vice versa, with the five eyes each being each other's eyes. So everything is being collected. The exact who does what to whom, it almost doesn't matter because the data is accessible, and we know certainly between CSIC and the NSA, they're constantly in communication and sharing information. So I think the bigger picture is how do we transform this? Do we continue in the method of bulk collection? And if we do, because I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So right now, that's what they're doing. What do we do right now? What can we do to transform this? And at the very least, what you can do is, as William Binney suggested many years ago, encrypt the data that you have such that you only poke into it when you do have a warrant, when you do have some warranted activity that justifies it. Actually, my office wrote a paper a short while ago called Privacy Protective Surveillance by Design. And it was all about designing the surveillance system if you must have all this bulk data, which there appears to be now, that at the very least you encrypt it, and the analyses that are done on encrypted values, and you only extricate personally identifiable data when you have legitimate evidence, and then you can take it to a court and get a subpoena, a warrant of some sort. I think we have to have a major transformation of the system, because if it continues this way, and no one wants to talk about, the spore of totalitarianism or what's happening, but can you imagine if the Stasi police had access to these kind of tools? It's mind-boggling what can take place when you have access to such wide information. And the notion that metadata, we're not accessing the content, it's just data about data, is such utter nonsense. People like Vint Cerf, the co-inventor of the internet, and many others have said that the value of metadata is actually far greater. It can reveal far more intrusive, invasive, detailed personal information than access to content alone.
Right. Joe, what about that? Foreign versus domestic. How are we ever going to square this?
Let's see. Yeah, that's not going to play very well. It certainly hasn't with the major U.S. technology companies that do so much business overseas and have to explain how their people, their customers in China are not going to be treated as well as customers in the U.S. It is the historic position of the U.S. intelligence establishment and most other intelligence establishment that anything outside of the borders is fair game. But when you're using private industry as your vehicle, I think it gets very complicated. And if it is going to change, and I'm not very convinced that it will, I think the technology companies would have to be the ones that really bring the weight. I mean, they're the ones that even the White House has to listen to. I mean, if Microsoft, Facebook, Google, all the others agree on something really huge and actually say that they're going to fight and put money in something, which I haven't seen happen yet still, that might actually help change something. But they do a lot of business with the U.S. government, so.
It looks like.
Thanks, Ron. It's Rudyard Griffiths here, coming to you direct from the voting results in the reception of Roy Thomson Hall. I've got them for you now. We started the debate, Ron, with 33% agreeing, 46% disagreeing, 21% undecided. We've ended up with 41% agree, 59% disagree. So a gain of only 8 percentage points by Hayden and Dershowitz versus 13 percentage points by Greenwald and Ohanian. So I would characterize it, Ron, as a kind of a squeaker of a win here on the con side, a 4 percentage point victory over the pro-debaters. Those are the results live right now from Roy Thomson Hall.
Wow, that's fascinating. We can all tweet in safety and security now, knowing we're not being watched.
I doubt it.
That's really great.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. I'll let you continue with the conversation. You got a whole bunch of people watching you, and you don't need to see my ugly headshot down there on the bottom of the screen. So I'll leave you guys to it.
Thank you, Rudyard. You did a great job in the moderation there. It's fantastic. So, Joe and Ann, I want to turn now to a subject that I think, speaking for myself, I always find a bit uncomfortable to talk about, but I thought we'd address it here. Edward Snowden made a video appearance there, taped specially apparently for this debate, and I get asked this all the time. I'm sure you all do. Snowden, patriot, hero, traitor? What's your view on that question and the man?
Those are my choices: patriot, hero, traitor.
You can take it anywhere you want, but I get asked that all the time, and it always makes me a bit cringy.
Yeah, I'm much more comfortable talking about what documents say and what policies are and what technological challenges exist and business interests than I am about the makeup of a human being. In addition, I'm a reporter, not a TV shrink, and I don't feel qualified to do a lot of that. I do think it's interesting. The fact that reforms are in motion lends some credence to the basic whistleblower conception.
Okay.
On the other hand, the fact that stuff has come out about specific techniques that are clearly being used in the wild and that are tipping the NSA, tipping NSA's hand. It's not the same as blowing a spying operation on Putin's house or something like that, which I think lots of people in the government were very worried about. But still, if you tell the world, here's a diagram that shows how we break into, an iPhone 3 that maybe somebody still has somewhere using this specific baseband antenna weakness, whatever. Okay, so now whoever we were targeting knows how to fix that. So it has been some of that. It hasn't just been the broad brush stuff. So I'm not going to give you hero or traitor. I think real human beings are complicated, and I think Edward Snowden is complicated.
That's a really good answer, and I want to ask you more or less the same thing, but preface it by saying that we had Thomas Drake up for the Cyber Dialogue recently, somebody that I think you've met before as well, and this is somebody who was a whistleblower, but actually hung around in the United States to face consequences. And if you look at that choice, I mean, Chelsea Manning in prison, 23 hours a day in solitary confinement with a light bulb over your head, is that a real choice? For those who ask, what about fleeing to Hong Kong and Russia? I feel this question makes me uncomfortable. At the same time, I think it's an important one to address because we do live in a surveillance society, and there will be more people wrestling with these choices in the future. What would you have done in this circumstance, do you think?
There is no question in my mind, and I have no trouble telling you that in my view, Mr. Snowden is a hero. I think we owe him a huge debt of gratitude. To suggest that he should have stuck around like Mr. Drake did, Thomas Drake, who we were both at the conference, to me, he's a broken man. I mean, what he had to go through, what he had to endure was horrendous. Thank God William Binney didn't have to go through that, but he still had to go through a lot when they broke into his house. And when you think of all of these stories that are just mind-boggling, and then you think of Edward Snowden has revealed all this information, and what is it exactly he's gotten in return? He's somewhere in Russia. I mean, would you trade your life for his? I mean, I can't imagine. He has revealed, for whatever reasons, an enormous amount of information relating to massive state surveillance that we simply would not be aware of absent his disclosures. So the fact that all of this is happening, and we didn't have a clue as to the scale on which it was happening, that speaks volumes. What does that say about freedom and liberty? We have to hold our governments accountable. You can't do that without transparency. The government is supposed to be there at the pleasure of the governed. It seems to be the reverse. And what we need to know is the scale of this kind of activity. That's what Mr. Snowden has revealed to us, which enables us to try to get answers from our respective governments and to try to change the system. So with due respect to all the people who say he's a traitor or whatever, what exactly, how is he benefiting? Would you trade your life for his? So in my view, also the public, you look at the public's response to this, especially in the United States, enormous levels of distrust. For the first time ever in the history of polling, 60% of Americans are saying they favor privacy over public safety and security. That's never happened before. 26% of the U.S. Public are changing their online behaviors as a result of these activities. I could go on and on.
I wish the same was true here in Canada. Unfortunately, we had a poll out yesterday from Journalists for Free Expression saying 60% of Canadians don't really care about the question of whether the government is spying on them. It's really bizarre.
I'm trying to ignore that.
Yeah, well, we're trying our best to change those views, but I don't know exactly how much time we have left. I think we're reaching the end here, but I want to talk finally about the consequences of the Snowden revelations, of Greenwald and his colleagues reporting around all of this. What impact has it had? You heard Dershowitz, I think it was, certainly Hayden. A common trope is that this is leading to the balkanization of the internet, and I actually think there's some truth to that countries' reactions are going to be self-serving and a bit cynical. They'll use the excuse of detaching from U.S.-controlled networks to put in place their own national censorship regimes. But I was struck, I was out in Vancouver for the annual meeting of the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, where Bruce Schneier gave a presentation, the keynote, resolution saying the internet is under attack, and they all agreed with this in the way that they do. And now they're dead set on finding a way to create technologies that will make the internet immune to mass surveillance. And I think in the long run, that may be the most important consequence. So, Joe, over to you. What do you think for you, and what are the one or two or three big consequences of all of this?
Well, I think those are two of the big ones. I mean, I think efforts by technologists who have historically seen, many of them seen the NSA as an ally in protecting U.S. interests, U.S. companies, U.S. citizens, that trust is just completely shattered. And unless something dramatic happens, like a spin-out of the NSA's Information Assurance Division, which nobody thinks is likely, then I don't see that changing for a long time. So that has reinvigorated this effort to, encrypt everything. And perhaps more important even than the IETF and the various other task forces that sort of hold it all together are there's actual startup money. There are venture capitalists that have been making zillions funding all these great cyber war attacking companies are now saying, maybe there might be a little money in the privacy thing. And there are attempts to do this that are, I think some are plausible. They're all better than nothing. They won't make collection impossible, but they will make bulk collection very difficult, much more difficult for those who participate in it. I think email may be hopeless. I think PGP is, PGP for the masses would be really great, but I don't see it happening. But text and apps, it could happen that way. So there's that from the Champions of Liberty or what have you. I do think there's economic harm to U.S. companies. I think the jury's still out on how bad it is. A lot of the early numbers were kind of made up. But we have a number of big companies at least blaming some fall off in China, at least partially on this. But again, some of that could be, mercantilism. Again, China wants to protect its companies, and if it's going to say it's because Cisco's spying on you that you got to buy Huawei, whatever. That's what they'll say. They're rooting for their companies the way we're rooting for ours. That's going to play out. I think balkanization is going to be a fairly big deal, but it's going to be messy. Brazil backed off some of its stuff. It turns out to be really hard to balkanize seriously.
Yeah. I'm about to head off to Berlin, where I think this topic is very active right now, about building a German network detached from the U.S. So Anne, over to you. Looks like you'll have the last word. What do you think the big consequences are of all of this?
I think one positive consequence on the tail end of what you were talking about, Bruce Schneier, and he was saying we have to take back the internet and develop more secure crypto. You're going to have wonderful new technologies, new innovative privacy protective technologies that will instill control of the data with the data subjects, with the individuals, and that's what excites me. Things like smart data, where the protections necessary to protect the data travel with the data and embedded in the data. You're going to have new forms of control. What people are realizing now, the public, is they're saying, oh my God, privacy is about control, personal control over the uses and disclosures of your data. How do we do that? So companies, innovative companies, are now developing technologies that are going to instill this control, wrap it around the data, so that as it travels through the internet and the cloud and wherever, the necessary permissions for the uses of that data travel with it. And these are new models that are just emerging. So I think the future, privacy breeds innovation. It drives creativity. So I'm very optimistic this is going to take us in new directions where personal control and liberty are wrapped around the data and people can have freedom.
That's really great. Well, listen, I truly enjoyed this conversation. I wish we could do this again sometime, maybe together over a dinner somewhere. It was a great debate, and I'd like to thank the Aurea Foundation and the Munk Debates for putting this together, and all of the debaters who did a fantastic job. Most of all, I want to thank both of you, and Cavoukian, thank you very much for doing this.
My pleasure.
And Joseph Menn, thanks for connecting from Los Angeles. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Ron.